If you've ever wondered how far an HOA Karen will go to feel powerful, listen closely, because mine crossed a line so outrageous that even the police said they'd never seen anything like it. My cabin wasn't just targeted, it was listed for sale online without my permission. And the woman behind it, my HOA president Karen, had no idea that her little stunt would snowball into a criminal case carrying up to 10 years in prison. But it all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when a stranger knocked on my door holding a printout of a real estate listing featuring my cabin. I remember opening the door and seeing a couple standing there with hopeful smiles. They asked, "Is the seller inside?" Confused, I told them I owned the place but wasn't selling. They exchanged nervous glances and showed me the online listing, photographs of my property, my deck, my dock, even interior shots they couldn't have possibly taken unless someone trespassed. The listing price was absurdly low, almost like someone wanted to push the sale through fast. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I checked the description, and the seller's contact information was listed as none other than Karen, full name, number, and HOA title. She had uploaded my personal property as if it belonged to her to sell. I felt adrenaline hit instantly. This wasn't overstepping. This was fraud. This was identity misuse. This was criminal trespassing. This was something people actually get prison time for. I immediately went to the HOA office, and sure enough, Karen was inside, laughing on the phone as if she didn't have a care in the world. I listened from the hallway as she said, yes, the cabin will sell fast. The owner is out of the picture. Just send the deposit." My blood boiled. I stepped inside. The moment she saw me, her face drained like she had seen a ghost. She slammed her laptop shut, stuttering excuses. I calmly asked her to reopen it. She refused. I told her the police were already on the way, which was true. And instantly, everything changed. Her arrogance cracked. Her voice trembled. She began pleading that it was just a misunderstanding, that she was trying to help the community, but the screenshots, the recordings, the listing, and the witnesses told the real story. Karen had no idea I was documenting everything. And she definitely didn't know what was coming next. When the sheriff's SUV rolled up to the HOA office, Karen's entire posture changed. She went from smug dictator to trembling wreck in seconds. The deputy stepped inside, asked for her name, and she squeaked out a yes so small it barely registered. I handed him the printed listing, the screenshots, and the recorded audio of her pretending to be the seller. His eyebrows rose instantly. He turned toward Karen and asked the question that sealed her fate, "Ma'am, do you have legal authority to sell this property?" Her silence answered for her. The deputy asked her to open her laptop. She hesitated, clutching it like a lifeline. He told her he could either seize it voluntarily or apply for an emergency warrant. Karen finally cracked and opened it with shaking hands. And there it was, her browser still open on the listing dashboard. Multiple buyers had messaged her. Several had sent deposits. She had already accepted 2 of them. That's when the deputy's tone changed from questioning to formal procedure. He told her she was under investigation for real estate fraud, wire fraud, and unauthorized use of property images. Her face twisted with panic as she grabbed my arm and whispered desperately, "Please tell him this is a misunderstanding. You know I meant well." I pulled my arm away. "You tried to sell my home," I reminded her. "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a crime." Karen was escorted outside for further questioning, her hands visibly trembling. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Some looked shocked, others unsurprised. One man quietly muttered, "She finally pushed too far." And honestly, that was the truth. Karen had a history of abusing power, but this was beyond rule enforcement. This was corruption in broad daylight. The deputy asked me to walk him through the events from the moment buyers arrived at my door. I explained everything, including my suspicion that Karen had trespassed to take interior photos. He nodded and took thorough notes. "If we confirm that," he said, "charges increase." Minutes later, a second officer confirmed signs of forced entry near a window she likely used. That was it. Karen burst into loud denial, shouting that the HOA gave her authority, but no one believed it. The deputy informed her she would not be arrested on the spot but would be facing formal charges after evidence processing. Karen looked like her world collapsed. She begged the officers to forget this ever happened, even offering to resign. But it was far too late. As she was placed in the back of the SUV for transport to the station, she locked eyes with me, fear replacing all her usual arrogance. And for the first time ever, Karen realized she wasn't above consequences. The next morning, I woke to a flood of messages, neighbors, realtors, even a local journalist asking if I knew anything about an HOA fraud scandal. Somehow, overnight, Karen's illegal listing had made its way onto a community Facebook group. Screenshots, comments, and even memes were circulating. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had become the town's most talked about criminal. And she hated it. Around noon, I received a call from the sheriff's office requesting I come in for a formal statement. When I arrived, the atmosphere was all business. They escorted me to a small interview room where the lead investigator laid out the evidence they had already collected. I was stunned. Not only did they have a complete copy of the fraudulent listing, but they'd tracked the financial transactions, multiple deposits Karen had accepted through her personal account. She didn't even try to hide it, the investigator said, shaking his head. That makes the case very straightforward. Then came the part that surprised me most. They pulled up security footage from a neighboring property. At 2 in the morning, Karen had walked to my cabin with a flashlight, gloves, and a small toolkit. They paused the footage as she pried open a back window. That was the moment I realized how premeditated her actions were. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake. She had planned everything. The investigator asked me to describe my relationship with Karen. I explained her reputation, the power trips, the threats, the attempts to control the entire lake community. He nodded, saying, "We've heard similar stories from others. But this time, she crossed the line into felony territory." After signing my statement, I was escorted out. On my way through the lobby, I saw Karen sitting alone on a bench, pale, shaking, mascara smudged. She looked nothing like the woman who once ordered people around with absolute confidence. When our eyes met, she whispered, "You're ruining my life." I didn't bother responding. Actions have consequences, and hers were stacking up fast. That evening, a formal notice was issued to the HOA board. Karen was suspended pending criminal charges. The community erupted. Some were relieved, some shocked, and a few, mostly her friends, tried spinning a narrative that she had been set up. But the evidence was overwhelming. No one sets themselves up by stealing deposits and breaking into a home. Later that night, I reviewed everything again, the messages, the recordings, the photos, and I felt something unexpected: relief. For the first time in years, the HOA actually felt like a community again, not Karen's personal kingdom. But things were far from over. The legal battle was only beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of legal documents, HOA meetings, and constant updates from the sheriff's department. Karen's charges were no longer rumors, they were official. Real estate fraud, wire fraud, trespassing, breaking and entering, attempted unlawful property transfer. Each one carried serious penalties, but combined, they painted a devastating picture. The community buzzed with speculation about what sentence she might face, and the number most commonly whispered was 10 years. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting, and I decided to attend. The room was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, some angry, some anxious, some almost gleefully curious. Karen sat at the front, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they desperately wanted to be anywhere else. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially me. The board president, newly appointed after Karen's suspension, called the meeting to order. He announced that, based on the overwhelming evidence, Karen would be removed permanently from the HOA leadership. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen shot to her feet, shouting that they had no right, that she had worked tirelessly for the community. But her lawyer tugged her down, whispering urgently. She fell silent, trembling with rage and humiliation. When they allowed public comments, neighbors lined up. One after another, they described Karen's years of harassment, fines for non-existent violations, threats over lawn decorations, forcing people to repaint homes for small color differences. For once, the entire room was united. The tyranny was finally being exposed. Halfway through the meeting, a deputy entered and asked to speak privately with Karen's lawyers. They stepped out, and Karen, left alone, looked around the room like a cornered animal. Minutes later, the lawyers returned, grim-faced. They whispered to her, and Karen's reaction was explosive. She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Later I learned the news they delivered. Investigators recovered more incriminating evidence from her laptop. She hadn't just listed my cabin, she was preparing to list 2 other properties without authorization. That discovery moved her case from serious to multiple counts, strengthening the possibility of a long prison sentence. When the meeting adjourned, Karen tried approaching me. Her voice was barely steady as she said, "Please, don't let them do this. I made a mistake. Don't ruin my life." I stepped back and replied calmly, "You tried to sell my home. You took money from people. You broke in at night. You did this to yourself." She froze, tears streaming, realizing sympathy wasn't coming. As I walked out into the cool evening air, the new HOA president shook my hand, thanking me for exposing everything. For the first time in years, the community seemed hopeful. But I knew Karen wasn't done fighting yet. When the footage of Karen stealing documents from my cabin hit the HOA emergency meeting, the room felt like it had been set on fire. People gasped, some covered their mouths, and others turned to stare directly at Karen, who sat rigidly in her seat, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. But the board president immediately paused the video the second Karen shot up from her chair and began shouting that it was all taken out of context. She claimed I had framed her, that I had edited the footage, and that my entire report was an attempt to get out of my responsibilities as a homeowner. The desperation in her voice wasn't subtle, it was practically vibrating. Yet the room wasn't buying it. Not this time. I stepped forward, placing a printed copy of the notarized report, timestamps, and the email trail she thought she'd deleted right onto the table. Every document was crisp, highlighted, categorized, and impossible to deny. Karen's face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line as the reality closed around her like a vice. The board president cleared his throat and announced that based on the evidence, not only was Karen suspended immediately, but the HOA would be cooperating fully with law enforcement. The moment he said the words criminal investigation, Karen's chair clattered backward as she stumbled to her feet. She tried to storm out, but a deputy, one who'd arrived quietly after seeing the footage earlier, stepped forward and blocked her path. The entire room watched in stunned silence as Karen's bravado crumbled in real time. She stuttered excuses, tried to pin the blame on everyone else, even accused the HOA president of conspiring against her. Nothing worked. The deputy calmly informed her she was being detained pending questioning and motioned for her to follow him. For a moment, Karen's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for a single ally. Not one person stood. As she was escorted out, her voice cracked into frantic pleas. She swore she meant no harm, claimed it was all for the community, and insisted she was just preventing violations before they happened. But her words bounced off the walls like empty echoes. The board formally recorded her actions as criminal misconduct, fraud, and unauthorized possession of personal property. It was a polite way of saying, Karen's reign was over. That night, As I stepped out of the meeting hall into the cold air, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Real, deep, unclenched relief. But the fight wasn't over. The investigation was only beginning, and what came next would shake the entire community harder than anyone expected. After Karen's detention, the HOA and law enforcement coordinated to secure all evidence. I provided everything: emails, screenshots, photographs, and recordings. Every piece reinforced the case against her. Investigators began tracing her financial records, uncovering deposits she'd accepted for my cabin and possibly others. Each discovery tightened the noose around her, and soon it became clear Karen wasn't just facing suspension. She was staring down multiple felony charges. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood and even the town. Social media buzzed with updates, neighbors sharing the story of a woman who had abused her HOA authority to commit real crimes. Headlines ranged from HOA fraud exposed to billionaire homeowner stops criminal listing. Karen's reputation collapsed overnight. People who once feared her now avoided her entirely. Friends distanced themselves, neighbors whispered, and the community collectively breathed a sigh of relief. I attended a formal meeting with investigators, walking them through the events chronologically. I described the moment buyers arrived at my cabin, the fraudulent listing, and Karen's trespassing to capture interior photos. Each detail strengthened their understanding of her intent. The investigators nodded, taking notes, and occasionally exchanging grim looks. "She planned this," one remarked quietly. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment, it was deliberate and premeditated. Meanwhile, Karen remained in custody under house arrest while prosecutors prepared formal charges. Her lawyers scrambled to negotiate, but the evidence was airtight. Investigators had timestamps, IP addresses, eyewitness accounts, and financial trails. Attempts to claim misunderstanding or accidental listing fell flat. Karen's usual manipulations and power plays had no effect. For the first time, she encountered authority she could not bend to her will. Neighbors began approaching me, some to express gratitude, others out of curiosity. One elderly couple said, "We've never seen anyone stand up to her like this." "Thank you." Their words reminded me why I had endured her years of petty tyranny. Protecting the cabin wasn't just about my property, it was about setting a precedent. No one should be able to manipulate the HOA or community for personal gain. Late that evening, I reviewed all documentation again. Emails, screenshots, receipts, photos, it was overwhelming. But one thing was clear: Karen's reckoning was inevitable. The upcoming court proceedings would determine her fate, and everything pointed to a very long prison sentence. Finally, there was a sense of justice that had been missing for years. As I stepped outside to watch the sunset over the lake, I felt calm. The cabin, the lake, and the community were secure. Karen's crimes had been exposed. The rest was now in the hands of the law. With Karen under formal investigation, the legal process began moving quickly. Prosecutors prepared multiple felony charges, including real estate fraud, wire fraud, and trespassing with intent to commit property theft. Her lawyers tried to argue miscommunication and community service intentions, but the evidence was unshakable. Every screenshot, recording, and email told the same story: Karen had deliberately listed my cabin, accepted deposits, and attempted to profit from my property without authorization. The HOA, eager to repair its reputation, fully cooperated with the investigation. Board members testified about her long history of misconduct and control attempts. Neighbors provided statements corroborating years of harassment and manipulation. Even those who had previously tolerated her behavior were now vocal witnesses to her crimes. The case quickly gained traction, and the media picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale: HOA overreach can turn criminal when unchecked. Karen, once the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, appeared in court for her first hearing. Her usual arrogance was replaced with nervous gestures and faltering speech. She tried to present her side, claiming she only wanted to ensure the lake's integrity and that the listing was never meant to be finalized. But the judge had already reviewed the evidence, timestamps showing she uploaded the listing, photos proving unauthorized access, and the paper trail of accepted deposits. The prosecutor outlined her actions in painstaking detail, highlighting the deliberate nature of her crimes. Karen's own emails and voice recordings were played in court. She had no credible defense. Every attempt to misdirect blame or claim innocence was systematically dismantled. The judge noted her repeated disregard for HOA rules and community trust, emphasizing that her conduct went far beyond typical HOA disputes. Outside the courthouse, neighbors watched from a distance, some quietly cheering. They had endured years of Karen's bullying and intimidation, but now justice was unfolding in real time. Even local news crews captured the moment, framing Karen as a cautionary tale: unchecked entitlement can escalate into serious crime. As I walked past the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure but also awareness. Karen would fight appeals, likely trying to manipulate any loopholes she could find. Yet for the first time, she was facing the consequences she had so long avoided. At the cabin that evening, the lake sparkled under the sunset. I finally felt calm again. The community was safe, my property secure, and the woman who had caused years of fear and tension was now fully accountable. The weeks following Karen's court appearance were intense. Her criminal case moved steadily through the legal system. Each hearing revealed more of her planning: emails detailing which cabins she intended to list next, screenshots of deposits she tried to pocket, and recordings of her threatening neighbors who questioned her authority. The judge had little patience, and the evidence left no room for doubt. Karen's crimes were intentional, systematic, and harmful, making her liable for multiple felony charges. During the trial, victims including myself were called to testify. I recounted the moment strangers knocked on my door, how Karen had listed my cabin without permission, and the psychological toll her actions caused. I described the midnight break-in to take interior photos, her threats, and the deception in her HOA communications. Each word painted a clear picture of a woman abusing her position of authority. Karen's attempts to interject, whisper to her lawyers, or discredit me were ignored. The courtroom was focused solely on the evidence. As the prosecutor laid out the financial trail, it became clear that Karen had not only tried to sell my property but had attempted to embezzle money from multiple homeowners. The deposits were tracked to her personal accounts. She had created fake listings, forged documents, and coerced people into believing she had legitimate authority. The judge repeatedly reminded her that intent mattered as much as action, and her deliberate planning left her facing severe consequences. Outside, the neighborhood watched with mixed emotions. Relief, vindication, and disbelief intermingled. For years, Karen had ruled through fear, fines, and intimidation. Now she was vulnerable, accountable, and exposed. Local media documented the trial, emphasizing that HOA overreach could become criminal when unchecked. Her fall from power was complete, and it served as a cautionary tale to others tempted to misuse authority. After the final day of testimony, the judge reviewed the overwhelming evidence and issued a ruling. Karen was convicted on multiple counts of real estate fraud, wire fraud, and trespassing. Sentencing was scheduled, and legal experts predicted she could face up to 10 years in prison. The gravity of the sentence was proportionate to the years she had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and control the community. Walking back to my cabin later that evening, I felt an incredible sense of closure. The lake was calm, my property secure, and the neighborhood could finally breathe. Karen's reign of intimidation and criminal activity was over. Justice had been served. The community was free from her manipulations, and I could finally enjoy my lakefront sanctuary without fear. As the sun set over the shimmering water, I knew one thing for certain: actions have consequences, and no amount of entitlement, HOA authority, or deception can shield someone from the law. Karen's decade-long lesson had begun.